So, before we get started in the second half, Christian, who's is my boss or was my boss, I'm not sure now anymore, from the Faculty of Medicine and Sciences. That's right, yes. It's just going to say a couple of words.
So thank you, everybody, and thank you, Simon. It's a great deal already, isn't it? So I'm Christian Mallon. I'm the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences, and as Simon says, I'm his boss. So you can imagine how much I love the conference pictures of all of the food and wine that Simon's doing. It's always good to know what you've been up to, Simon, so thank you very much for sharing that. But welcome to Keele. This is our 75th year as a university, so it's a very special time to have this celebration for Simon's career. Keele was established in a bit of an unusual way as an institution where the arts and humanities met with the sciences, where people lived on campus and worked together. And I can't think of another academic who really encompasses that more than Simon in terms of bringing together art and science. So really very much the vision that Lord Lindsay would have had. But Keele's also a little bit of an odd place. I think we can say that, can't we, Simon? That nobody really knows where we are and what we do. If you go to a conference and say you're from Keele University, people often think you've come from Germany or somewhere else. And so actually, being identified here in the beautiful Staffordshire countryside is a little bit of a surprise for people. But Keele punches above its weight, particularly when it comes to research. And as we've heard this afternoon, a lot of that is down to Simon and his leadership. Simon's developed and led a world-leading nephrology research group at University Hospital of North Staffordshire. And that's a massive achievement. But not only that, he's held numerous leadership positions at the university, which have grown research across a whole range of different areas in secondary care, but also multi-professional research into primary care. So very unusual for a specialist to be so involved and so committed to research on the whole for patient benefit. But what I want to do just before I move on to the next speaker is just highlight two areas which I think really do encompass Simon. In my real job, I'm a GP. When Simon decided to stop seeing patients, I had about 15 people come to see me, crying, upset, wondering what is going to happen to them now. Because Simon took the time to listen to them. He took the time to understand them and to find out about them and their lives. They felt truly supported because he's an outstanding doctor, and I think you're still very much missed, Simon. The final thing I just want to say is around Simon's leadership. I think we wouldn't all be here today if he wasn't an inspirational leader. But he's touched the lives of many across all disciplines, all specialities, and across the world. So whilst we have desert island papers that will take from Simon's research, I think his real legacy is in the people he's met and the careers that he's supported. So from Keele, Simon, thank you very much. I'm delighted that you're going to stay with us as an Emeritus Professor. I'm going to spend the next 2 days going through your expenses forms. Just have a little bit.
Thank you very much, Christian, and also thanks for your support. It's been fantastic in the last few years. I moved across to Keele about 15 years ago, we think. I'm not entirely sure. Having been previously an NHS doctor. So the next talk is on a subject that's close to my heart. I know it's close to John's heart. John Feely, who's sitting in the middle there, in Barrister came up with the idea of this project, which is called Saving Young Lives. And it's about bringing together peritoneal dialysis, which is this very straightforward treatment to treat particularly young people in low-resource settings. I'm delighted that Brett Cullis, who now leads that programme, is going to do a short talk on that. I think he's online, but I can't see him, so I'm most hoping he is. Can you hear me, Brett?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can indeed. That's fantastic. And your first slide is up, I think. So you can go ahead. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Simon. Well, I'm extremely honoured and grateful to have been invited to present this talk at Simon's Festschrift. I'm just really sorry I can't be there today. But Simon's been an inspirational mentor of mine for many, many years, all the way through my career. I remember the first time I met Simon was at the opening of the EuroPD meeting. And I asked a colleague of mine, how is it that someone so incredibly brilliant in academia could have been gifted with the talent to conduct a world-class choir? I think all those tributes today have shown that these are not your only talents, Simon, and why you're one of the most respected nephrologists in the world. I've had the privilege of working with Simon in what I think is his most honourable facet of his career, and that's his dedication to bringing kidney care globally especially to disadvantaged populations. I've had the privilege of working with him in the ISN Dialysis Working Group and the WHO Toolkit, but the most important has been his role in the Saving Young Lives Steering Committee, which he's been on for many years. And I'm going to talk about the work that we do largely through Simon's input. So just some background, acute kidney injury is common. About 13 million people develop it annually, and the majority of these develop it in low resource countries, where it's expected that about 1.4 million people die per year. Unfortunately, dialysis is not available everywhere, and about 50% in low middle income countries are not able to access dialysis due to either lack of resources or out-of-pocket expenses. And so these patients have no access to dialysis when they get acute kidney injury. There's a difference between acute kidney injury in high-income countries and low or low-middle-income countries. In high-income countries, it's a hospital-acquired kidney injury, usually in elderly patients with multiple comorbidities, often in the ICU. Whereas in the low-resource countries, it's predominantly disease of the young. These are people with no comorbidities, and if you can nurse them back to health, they go on to live a good, functional life. So this is a study at the top from Uganda, and you can see these are patients that presented with acute kidney injury, and 82% of the patients were under the age of 50 and nearly 90% under the age of 60. Compare that to the studies below, which are taken from the US and the UK, where the mean age was around about 65 to 70 years. Also importantly is that in the study from Uganda, 50% of the patients were either employed or students. And these are often breadwinners for a large community. They may be a breadwinner for a community of 20 people. So if you can save their life and bring them back to health, that has a huge impact on the community from an economic perspective as well. So it's money well spent. Now, why do people with AKI and low resource settings die? Well, they die from the associated illness, whether that's malaria or infection, but also because of late presentation. They're either not diagnosed in time or they're not transferred in time. There's a lack of skilled clinicians to diagnose the acute kidney injury and how to treat it. There's a lack of dialysis resources I've shown you. And many of these people, although dialysis facilities are offered in most countries around the world, the vast majority are in the main centers, and the majority of the population live in rural areas, and so don't have access to the dialysis treatment centers. These are two studies which were done, one in South Africa, one in Malawi, and we asked primary care nurses or primary care physicians what training they had in renal disease and acute kidney injury. And you can see less than 50% had had any training in renal disease at all, and less than 10% had any training in acute kidney injury in the last 10 years. And this was similar in Malawi. And so it's really important, if these people don't know about acute kidney injury, how they're going to diagnose it and how they're going to refer people in for treatment. So what can we do about it? We can't do much about the associated illness, but we can do things about late presentation. We can supply point-of-care creatinine testing, but more importantly, education, education, education. Because if they know how to identify and treat these patients, they're not going to necessarily go on to develop end-stage or acute kidney injury needing dialysis. They might recover before they need it. We also can provide them with acute PD, which can be given locally. So if they live in a rural district hospital environment, they can start on PD before they're transferred to a major center. And this is where the Saving Young Lives program comes in. It was started in 2012, and it was a partnership between IPNA, ISN, ISPD, and the Sustainable Kidney Care Foundation. And it was funded by the Recanati Kaplan Foundation for a 5-year period. The mission was to develop programs in low resource settings to prevent acute kidney injury and manage it in both children and adults, and use acute PD if dialysis was necessary. The way it worked was that there was a Saving Young Lives Steering Committee, which is still functional today. The funding came from the Kaplan Foundation, and ISN, ISPD, and IPNA were involved in the education and training of clinicians, and the Sustainable Kidney Care Foundation with providing fluids, catheters, and organizing memoranda of understanding between the hospitals so they would take over and try and ensure some sustainability of the program. And in the first 5 years, 11 sites were set up predominantly in Africa, and of those, 8 continue to function well. The foundation, the 5-year Kaplan Foundation funding ran out in 2017, and so we had to change tack at that point because we could not supply fluids or catheters. And so we embarked mainly on an education drive to try and teach people how to manage acute kidney injury. And at that point, the Sustainable Kidney Care Foundation fell away. And it was at this point that Simon became involved in the Saving Young Lives program in 2016. And he brought EuroPD on board for a 5-year period. And we're so grateful for EuroPD for allowing us to grow exponentially during this time. To date, we've managed to train delegates throughout the world. We started predominantly in Africa, but in 2021, we moved into South and Southeast Asia, Oceania, and Latin America. And we've trained doctors and nurses in 49 countries how to do acute PD, how to put PD catheters in at the bedside. And over 700 clinicians have been trained to date. EuroPD had a 5-year agreement with us, and then the Ukraine war came on and they moved into that realm. So since then, we've now got 3 main partners, but the French Society of Nephrology and Transplantation and the Asia Pacific Society of Nephrology have come on board. And this is really important because half the countries in Africa are French speaking, and we weren't able to get into those areas and try and teach people. As I say, it's run by a steering committee made up of volunteers of both adult and pediatric nephrologists and pediatric and adult intensivists. And there's representation from all of the societies involved. We couldn't do it, though, without our advisors and trainers. And these are volunteers who come and teach on our courses, but also, very importantly, they identify the champions that we're going to be training and bringing to our courses, and also giving us an idea of where the areas of need are, so that our money is well spent. Why did we choose to do acute PD? Why not hemodialysis or CKRT? Well, it's locally available. It can be done in the district hospital. It requires less water and electricity than hemodialysis. It's lower cost, requires less training of doctors and nurses. There's some evidence of more rapid recovery of renal function, and there are signs of equivalent outcome compared to extracorporeal therapies. These are 2 surveys that were done of hospitals in low middle income countries. And you can see only 38% of hospitals in Africa have reliable electricity, and only 66% have reliable water supplies. So surely you can't run a reliable hemodialysis service, whereas certainly you can with PD. This is a survey of sub-Saharan African countries, and it clearly shows that the vast majority of people live in rural areas. They don't live in the centers where hemodialysis is offered. So we need to be able to reach out into these areas. Kajira Kalonzo was one of the first Saving Young Lives sites, Saving Young Lives champions, and that was in Tanzania. And he looked at the cost of acute PD for patients with AKI. And he worked out that it was between $420 and $780 per life saved. Now, the WHO classes a highly cost-effective treatment as being less than 1 GDP per capita. And in Tanzania at the time, the GDP is $1,200. So certainly it's a highly cost-effective treatment. And this has been shown in Uganda and in India that it costs about half of acute hemodialysis. We were worried about offering acute PD if it wasn't as good as hemodialysis. But we looked at this in the ISPD guidelines, both in 2015 and 2020, and concluded that there was good evidence that it was as good as extracorporeal therapies. And this was concurred with the Cochrane collaboration, who found similar results. So we're not offering them a sub-rates treatment. There are, however, a number of barriers to PD for AKI. So this is taken from a study that was done in Thailand. Now, Thailand is a PD first population, a PD first country. And so you'd imagine they'd do a lot of acute PD, but only 9% of centers reliably did acute PD. And the biggest barrier was being able to insert PD catheters by nephrologists, and also how to actually prescribe dialysis for acute PD. And I'll show you how we've dealt with that. The other thing we've had to look at with Saving Young Lives is how to overcome the barrier to PD fluid supplies and catheter supplies. Many of these places aren't able to buy in commercially produced PD solutions, and certainly aren't able to get Tenkov catheters or the Cook catheters, which we recommend for children. The SWAL training model is made up of a number of facets. The main thing is our formal workshops, where we bring in people who've been identified as potential champions to a number of different types of courses. The one course run by Minion McCulloch is a fantastic course at the Red Cross Children's Hospital in Cape Town. It's a 5-day course where people are trained how to look after sick children, how to get vascular access, an APLS course, and then how to do acute PD. We also run 2-day courses which are focused on acute kidney injury and how to insert PD catheters, and then single-day courses aligned to a number of conferences, again, focusing on these areas. We've also tried to produce educational materials. The ISPD guidelines are key to this, but we've also got video demonstrations online. And as we've had to grow, we've needed to train a number of other people to go and train in these workshops. So we've started running Train the Trainers workshops. And finally, we tap into fellowships, both IPNA, ISN, and ISPD, to try and give extra training to our delegates. The ISPD guidelines we wrote in 2015, and a number of the people on there are people that are either on the steering committee or advisors for SYL. And the idea of the guidelines was that they were designed for a high-income country, but also could be used in a low-resource setting, understanding the realities of dealing with patients in these settings. And what at face value might appear to be a sub-rate treatment is certainly in some cases going to save a life, because if you don't use a makeshift catheter or a PD fluid, that person's going to die of their acute kidney injury. So we've given in the guidelines some ideas as to what we can do, and with Saving Young Lives, we teach them how to do it. For example, we teach them how to mix solutions locally. So if you use Ringer's lactate and 50% dextrose or Plasmolite B, you can actually make a solution that's very similar to a commercially produced PD solution. Now, we were concerned that if we did this, people were going to get peritonitis, but I'm glad to say that this study taken out of Mbingo Hospital in Cameroon, which is another Saving Young Lives site, they looked at the peritonitis rates between their commercially produced solutions, and then once they started using locally produced solutions, and peritonitis rates were the same between the two groups. So if it's done carefully, it can be life-saving. And 2 further studies, one from Cape Town from Minion McCulloch and the other from the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is another Saving Young Lives site, have shown that peritonitis rates are very low, even if you mix your own solutions. Same for PD catheters. We recommend using Tenkov catheters or Cook catheters in pediatrics, but often these are not available. So we give them ideas as to what we can. We've had to develop models for this. Now, how do you teach someone how to put in a PD catheter at the bedside? Well, we've developed a model, the pork belly model, that is strapped over a packing crate. It looks very much and feels very much like a normal abdomen. And so people are quite confident after practicing on this, how to insert a catheter at the bedside. We've also had to teach people how to use things like nasogastric tubes, adult hemodialysis catheters, rigid catheters, intercostal drains, all of which have been life-saving, and we've got a number of records of this. As I said, Minion McCulloch runs the Red Cross Clinical Skills Workshop in Cape Town, and we've brought in doctors and nurses from all over Africa to try and teach them how to deal with sick kids. More than 250 people have been trained. What was most important was that we realized that you actually needed to bring teams together. You needed a doctor and a nurse to come to these courses, because when they go back home, they need to rely on each other to get the service going. As I say, we've branched out into South America and run courses in Colombia, Puerto Rico, Guatemala, and recently at the WCN in Buenos Aires, and trained a number of people in all of these countries. Also in Southeast Asia and Oceania, and this was at the ISPD meeting in Singapore, where we trained people all the way from Sri Lanka across to Fiji and pretty much everywhere in between. During COVID, we had to go virtual and ran a number of courses and mentor programs online, but also our videos are available online so people can watch how to insert PD catheters at the bedside in both adults and children. And as I've shown you, we've managed to train people globally on how to do this, and we continue to grow. What about outcomes? This is taken from Kajira Kalonzo in Tanzania. They published their data on 100 patients treated with acute PD following the Saving Young Lives program with a 73% survival rate. We ran a REDCap database for the first 7 years, and people submitted their data, and we had 408 patients, data on 408 patients. We had a 60% survival to discharge. Now, survival was actually 70% after acute PD, but unfortunately, 10% of patients had chronic kidney disease at presentation and couldn't carry on with dialysis. Now, remember, these are people that would never have been offered dialysis in the past. So the survival would have been about 0%. The mean age was around 9.5 years, and the duration of dialysis about 10 days. And the vast majority of people had complete recovery of renal function. Subsequent to this, we've started sending surveys to our delegates because we want to know what can we do better, where can we improve to try and make these projects that they go and set up sustainable. And we got data back so far from, of the 57 delegates we've sent questionnaires to. After 6 months, 38 responded, and they were able to set up a APD program in 58% of cases, and around 38% of people were actually able to insert PD catheters at the bedside after their training. There were a number of barriers, though, a lack of confidence, and we try and feed these people into the fellowship programs to try and support them further. Lack of support from the hospital, especially for nephrologists to put PD catheters in. It's usually thought to be the realm of a surgeon. There's no place to perform PD. Many places actually don't have many cases, and so they didn't have a chance to set up the program. And mechanical complications, which happen all over the world. Thankfully, the program is expanding, and this is largely due to people that have come to training programs and then taken on training on their own right. And you can see at the top, Kim Yap and Sharon Tao run workshops in Myanmar, and Mary Rose Busquera at the bottom, who came to the Singapore meeting and has developed a huge program across the Philippines, teaching people how to insert PD catheters at the bedside. And here you can see at their national meeting, her running a workshop and going to various sites to teach people how to put their PD catheters in at the bedside. Samson Antwi is one of our poster boys for the Saving Young Lives program. He has been incredibly successful. He lives in Kumasi in Ghana. He's treated well over 100 kids with acute PD. But more importantly, he's taught those doctors out in the rural hospitals how to do acute PD. So they don't even have to refer them into a center. They can treat them out in the periphery. This is from Kolibu, this young girl you can see on acute PD. Certainly wouldn't have done so well had it not been for SYL. This was a young child after the Singapore meeting. One of the doctors in Indonesia went back to a remote island. This child had acute kidney injury following a motor vehicle accident, and using a makeshift catheter and locally mixed solutions, treated this child who survived and went home. I've just got a number of other slides. This is from Aparna Yanga in India. These are slides that were sent back to her from courses that were run in Bangalore. And this is in Mauritius, the first child treated with acute PD. This is a child in India. What is important, you see at the bottom there, I'm so happy to have learned a life-saving skill. Many of these doctors just have to watch people die from acute kidney injury. So they feel very empowered once they've been to the Saving Young Lives courses. This is another child clearly survived from their acute kidney injury. And this is a child from Mozambique. Again, one of our trainees from the Red Cross course went home, and the weekend she got back home, this child had malaria. She put a PD catheter in, only having practiced on a pork belly, and the child survived and was discharged home. So I'm going to finish with this slide, which I think is really important. This is at the meeting in Singapore where we were doing a fact-finding mission to try and work out what the needs were in Southeast Asia. And you see where Simon is sitting. He's right at the back. Simon never pushes to the front and takes the limelight. He's always at the back, providing his wisdom and supporting those people in front of him to go to greatness. Simon, we're so grateful from the Saving Young Lives program for all you've done for us over the years. You've been an incredible force for Saving Young Lives. We wish you well with your retirement. We congratulate you on all your successes. And we're just really glad that you're not retiring from Saving Young Lives just yet. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Fred. That's fantastic, wasn't it? I take a little credit for that, but it's been great to be part of it, and it's going from strength to strength. So, good.
Nice to see you, Brett. You're there. I can see your face now. We're running a bit behind schedule, so
I don't think anyone have any burning questions or comments to make, or you just want to. Yes, Martin.
Can I just ask Brett about, thanks, so Brett, how's the funding model working now? Is there a lot of local funding or how's that happening?
No, so fortunately, we're still funded by ISN, ISPD, and IPNA. They're major funders. And then the French Society of Nephrology and Transplantation and APSN have come on as junior partners. So they fund us. So all of the funding for our training comes from the societies. In terms of PD fluids, the clinicians that come, they have to develop that in their local hospitals. And that's why in many of the places, they can't afford Tinkoff catheters. They can't afford commercially produced solutions. They just have to use what they have available and go to the cupboard and see what they can use.
Thank you.
Yes. There was comments or points? Yes, John.
Thanks very much, Barry. It's just worth making the general point, I think, also to remind people a bag of PD fluid doesn't seem very expensive to you, but relatively speaking, it is expensive to them. And actually, it's much more expensive because these fluids are not made in their local country. So they cross continents, they cross national boundaries, they pay excise duty, they pay import duty, they pay additional under-the-counter payments, and it becomes unsustainable. And that's another reason why local fluids prove so important.
that's a serious problem, actually, right across the board for the developing, the low resource settings. That PD could be such a useful treatment within there, not just for acute but for chronic. It's something that certainly Edwina and I and others in this room have got our teeth into. I'm going to try and do something like this. We really has got to reach out.